Hello everyone, it's Justin Reviews Games back with another video. Today, we're going to be covering one of gaming's most well-known animals. No, not that one. The big, blue, talking, walking hedgehog. But first, let's take a little trip to the past, shall we? Throwback to 2005 at the Los Angeles Convention Center. It's May 18th and E3 is just about to start. Excited as you are, you hurry on over to the convention center and you get to see all the booths and gameplay demos. But the most important thing about E3 was the trailers. You and everyone else are sat down to watch the event unfold before you throughout the day. But then, a clear blue gem floats about the screen on stage, and it's then that you notice this is something familiar. Then it zooms into the gem to reveal a forest, but in the POV of someone running across the grass. Our favorite blue hedgehog. You notice the feel of this game differs a lot from Sonic games that came before this. Sonic Team is going for a more realistic look for the world here while keeping the cartoony look for the Sonic characters we know and love. After watching him take down some robots, we see him go supersonic and then it fades to black. That's all we saw of this game until E3 the following year, where we got a better look at the game and how it plays. But things weren't as awesome as Sega made it out to be under the hood. About halfway into this game's development, the team was split. Half of them working on another Sonic game which would later become Sonic and the Secret Rings, and the other half made this. Sonic the Hedgehog was meant to be a reboot of sorts for the franchise, and you can tell they had big aspirations for this title, but as you're about to see, things didn't exactly come out to how the world thought they would be from the trailers. The game starts us with a fireworks show over the water in this city which we don't know the name of yet, with a shot of the princess sailing into the center of the city for some sort of event. Then, soon after, she has a vision of the entire city catching fire and a monster coming out of the flames, but quickly snaps back to reality. She then gives prayer to the sun, wishing for eternal light and setting the flame before the city is attacked by robots. But not just any robots, Eggman's robots. He explains he has arrived to obtain the secret of the flames of disaster from the princess, and insists she comes with them and hand him the Chaos Emerald she possesses. Of course, she refuses, and then a familiar blue blur circles around them and greets the princess. She quickly remembers another creature like Sonic from the past, but more on that later. After a cool scene of Sonic fighting off the robots and carrying the princess away, another character is seen watching them from a distance and calls Sonic the Iblis Trigger. After a short introduction and some more robot bashing, Eggman somehow manages to steal the princess, which we now know is named Elise, and takes off with her. But before she gets too far away, she throws her Chaos Emerald to Sonic to keep it away from Eggman. After talking to the townsfolk, trying to dig up some info on Eggman's whereabouts, we find he has been spotted heading towards the beach. After entering the mirror, we are very quickly introduced to how this game plays. The game does a very good job at showing the speed at some parts while feeling kinda slow at others. We're introduced to many mechanics like rail grinding, wall jumping, character swapping, and sliding, which we'll see a lot more of throughout. We also get to play as Tails for the first time in this level. Tails is pretty unique to Sonic in being able to fly a pretty good distance, and instead of having a homing attack, Tails throws fake rings at enemies to defeat them and they explode. After making our way through the beach, we're met with our first high-speed section, where we have to keep up with Eggman's ship to try and save Elise. These sections of the game at times are very hard to keep up with control-wise, and you have to be very careful with how much you're trying to move the character, otherwise you're gonna lose a few lives. The game also shows us that upon completing a level, we're given a golden medal, which I still have no idea what they do even after completing the game. Afterwards, we see we have not quite kept up with the ship, and Tails thinks it's a good idea to go back to the city to collect more info. We get a tip there that Eggman and Elise are heading for the desert, so we quickly follow suit and search for the princess. For some reason, the game doesn't want to show us the journey of getting to and finding Elise. Instead, we just skip to Sonic saving her, but first, we have to take out the Egg Cerberus. In order to take it out, we have to wait for it to stop running and slide across the rail that is conveniently placed on its back, and grab its horn. Then, we must slam it into the wall and break the mask on its head to then be able to do more damage. After this, we have to run across the desert with Princess in arms to make it back to the city once again. But this level introduces a new mechanic where we use the power of the princess to be able to not sink into the sand under our feet. Before we make it to the city though, we stop in the middle of this random field so Elise can thank our hero, and she wraps up his totally obvious wound. before sharing a nice moment with a butterfly landing on Sonic's nose. It was at this point where I could tell this game is very much drawing inspiration from Final Fantasy, and how its stories are portrayed. She then goes into detail about her backstory to Sonic so he understands why Eggman wants to take her. Sonic then quickly grabs her hand and tries to bond with her by making her run with him? We're now actually in the city, but now we're met with another hedgehog that we saw from the opening cutscene, Silver. But why is he here, and why is he calling us the Iblis Trigger? After a very not at all fun boss fight, Amy jumps in to save Sonic before Silver can finish him. We're then tasked with finding Elise once again, but before that, we have a few smaller tasks to complete. We have to escort this random dog and find the general. Then and only then can we make our way to our good friend Knuckles to aid us in the search for Elise, which takes us to the White Acropolis area, which is the first vehicular level in the game where we get to jankily ride a snowboard further down the path to Eggman's base. Afterwards, we're doing another standard running segment until we actually arrive to Eggman's base. Once we get there, we're immediately greeted by Eggman, and he still has Elise with him. But if we don't give him the Chaos Emerald, she's toast. We give him the emerald, but he pushes the button, putting up his shield around us called the Solaris Prototype, which sends us forward in time. But Eggman reveals in order to complete his prototype, he needs Elise's power to revive the flames of disaster. After this scene, we're seen falling into a version of the same base, but run down and in ruins. Then, surprisingly, we're greeted by Shadow and Rouge. Then we are told we need a space-time rift to go back to our own time, but Chaos Control by itself isn't enough. After boarding and running through a rundown city, we then find Silver with an unnamed hedgehog and find out that he is the one that told Silver and Blaze to kill Sonic and save the world. But he also just doesn't have a mouth for some reason?
Subscribe to Dustin Reviews Games. Is that even your handle? Yeah, it is. It's with a Z. You should subscribe to Dustin Reviews Games. He's gonna give everyone gummy worms. I'm Shadow the Hedgehog or whatever the fuck's going on here. Yeah.
He then sends them to a point in time where Sonic was still alive. Afterwards, Tails does some research and finds the princess dies after being kidnapped by Eggman when this battleship explodes. We then follow Shadow and Rouge to an area called the Flame Core to find the Chaos Emerald we need to be able to go back to our own time. We are finally able to play as Knuckles for the first time in this level. Here we see Knuckles is able to fly, climb up walls, and has a 3-hit combo attack. After some more running, we're finally met with Iblis himself, one of the 2 characters responsible for the world becoming a wasteland. In this fight, we jump from platform to platform in order to dodge the fireballs being shot at us. We then jump to the platform with the big purple rock to trigger Iblis to land in front of it and allow Sonic to attack him. After a few loops, he surfs the lava to land directly in the middle of the map to allow Sonic to deliver the final blow. After collecting the emerald, we Chaos Control with the help of Shadow to return back to our regularly scheduled timeline. But Shadow and Rouge didn't come back with us despite jumping into the same portal. After learning that Eggman has the princess with him on a train heading to the battleship, we quickly follow behind him to stop the train. This level was one of the hardest in the whole game for me because for the longest time I could not keep ahead of the train long enough to flip the switch to keep the train from exploding. After that section, we have a much easier speed section to then finally catch up to Eggman again. After saving Elise again, we're met by Silver, once again trying to kill Sonic to attempt to save the world. But this time, fortunately, we do not have to fight him, and after Eggman takes Elise, Shadow steps in to let us go save our damsel in distress. After Shadow very cringily says his name, Sonic runs off to save the princess. In the next scene, Elise trust falls off of the battleship to let Sonic scoop her up at the very last second. Now, we get to fight the Egg Genesis. This fight is very straightforward, but not literally. We run in circles while avoiding the lasers and rockets to let the ship spawn smaller ones that we homing attack to be able to get on top of the machine and deal damage. After a couple loops of this, we have defeated the boss and saved Elise once again, but this time we get to play a jungle level while holding Elise, which means we have to remember to hold the right trigger to run across the water without sinking. After clearing this level, we get to watch a short scene of Sonic carrying the princess out of the jungle, but Sonic tells Elise that she should go back to the castle where it's safe. After another short scene of the 2 bonding, we swap back to the city where we see Eggman is demanding the princess come out of hiding so he can take her away again to complete his evil plan. She complies, flies and goes with Eggman again. The fact they made it a recurring plot point for her to either get taken because she wasn't paying attention, or just willingly put herself in Eggman's hands was very annoying to me because it just felt redundant. The story would have been at least an hour or two shorter had this not been a thing. Afterwards, we then head back to the beach to chase after Eggman. After completing the second beach level, Eggman tells Elise his entire evil plan for some reason, which also felt completely unnecessary. The only thing of value here is Eggman tells Elise that she has the power of Iblis inside her. Before making our way to Eggman's base once and for all, we must complete the 3 trials of Soliana. The Trial of Knowledge, in which we must enter the correct portals in the correct order to find the exit. The Trial of Courage, where we have to defeat all the enemies with 0 rings. And finally, the Trial of Love, where we have to pick our true love to help us in the final fight. Of course, we chose Amy here. We now have the final section of the story opened up to us by grabbing onto this random eagle talon. Before we get there, Silver shows up and decides he's a good guy now and wants to help us save the princess and the world. After a very long level where we play as both Sonic and Silver, we see that Eggman's battleship is close to malfunctioning and will crash and kill them both. Sonic, convinced that he was too late, falls to his knees and isn't ready to accept that the princess is dead. But he is excited to hear that there is a way to go back in time and save them. Silver and Sonic then use Chaos Control to go back in time once again and alter the timeline. We then ring the 3 big bells in Soliana to open the door that lets us go to Eggman's base once and for all. After a very long segment of playing as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, we've made it to the final battle in the Egg Wyvern, where we must take down Eggman once and for all. In this fight, we have to dodge his rockets and lasers, and when he flies toward us, we have to jump up and grab the horn on its head to run into the debris falling from the battleship. After multiple loops, we've defeated him and saved the princess for the last time. We then see a beautiful cutscene of Sonic and Elise escaping the ship right before it crashes into the water. After our heroes laugh it off, the screen fades to black and we've finished the game, except there's more. But before we get to that, I was really surprised when I was listening to the end credit song and heard my man Akon. This was probably the most random person to put on this song, and it didn't really fit all that well, but it is what it is. Now, we move on to the next part of the game.
It's no use!
We begin our next part of the game with a short backstory where Silver tells us that the world is in ruin, and he doesn't exactly know why, but he wants to save it if possible. He's looking for Iblis, because he believes that once he defeats him, the world will be safe. We're then introduced to Silver's friend Blaze, and they storm off to search for Iblis in the ruined city. Here, we are introduced to the mechanics that are unique to Silver's story in using psychokinesis to throw objects at enemies and ground pounding to stun enemies and throw them at other enemies. After gaming as both Silver and Blaze, we find Iblis and must defeat him. We have to use psychokinesis to throw rocks at Iblis to damage him until he walks backwards to send shockwaves. After this, he closes in and slams his head down so Silver can use his power on it to do massive damage. After a couple of loops, we bring him down and save the day, for now, because after being defeated, he will just rise from the ashes again in another place. After this, the same unnamed character shows up and tells Silver that he must find the one responsible for this. They then go back to the ruins of Eggman's base and he explains Silver needs to change the past, but with his help, because he can travel through time. He then sends them back in time to find Sonic and defeat him and save the world. After they step through the portal, on the other side, Silver then shortly realizes they've all been separated and begins his search for the Iblis trigger, which leads us to the jungle. After we scour the jungle, we see Blaze walking on the beach where it seems is where she ended up. She begins her search in the beach to hopefully find a lead on the Iblis trigger. Here, we get to see how Blaze plays, which is kind of the same as Sonic. She just has a spin attack that can be used both on the ground and in the air, and she also has a double jump. After this level, we get to see a scene of a familiar pink creature interacting with Silver while he's spying on Sonic and about to pounce. This person turns out to be Amy, and she mistakes us for Sonic despite us being a completely different color. During this interaction, Sonic gets away with Amy and insists on helping us look for this person. After gathering info from the townsfolk on Sonic's whereabouts, we make our way to the desert. Amy somehow senses Sonic is nearby, and before we can start our search, Silver admires the desert atmosphere, and then we make our way into the temple and search for the Iblis trigger. This level doesn't really have anything crazy going for it, it's just a lot of throwing things at enemies to kill them and opening doors, but there is this neat puzzle involving pushing pool balls into the corners to then open a door, followed by some light platforming until we make our way to Amy, who is very weird. So Amy has some interesting abilities in her kit. She can for some reason turn invisible, which I've been told she doesn't do in any other game. And she has a double jump, which removes every single piece of momentum she has, and you can't control her during the second jump as well, which was really difficult to get used to. After this, we head back to the city and see Sonic is with Elise. Silver then quickly approaches him, and we start the fight from Sonic's story, but we play as Silver instead. So of course, we instantly win this fight with our psychokinesis powers. Here again, we almost subdue Sonic, but Amy steps in just like before. Afterwards, we get a scene with Silver and Blaze, and Silver has doubts about having to kill Sonic and save the world. But Blaze reminds him if they don't take this chance, the world will remain how it is. Silver then comes up with the idea of sneaking into Eggman's base to get more info on what to do about this. Of course, to do this, we have to go through the snow again, but without a snowboard because only Sonic can do that, I guess. We then make our way to the entrance of Eggman's base, but we have to defeat the Egg Genesis to gain entrance. But the fight is exactly the same as Sonic's story, but instead we have to throw things at the four corners of the ship to damage it. After we defeat it, we get a Chaos Emerald. We keep this as a lucky charm in our quest, and it may help us later. We then see a short scene of Amy rescuing Elise from a cell for some reason. We don't know how or why she got there though. They then go back to the city and share a small interaction where they both explain that they have a guy they're crushing on, but neither of them knows it's Sonic, which I thought was hilarious. Shortly afterwards, Elise gets taken by Eggman's robots to his battleship. After this, Silver and Blaze are met by Mephiles, the other guy responsible for the state the world is in. And he asks who the Iblis Trigger is and why he wants to destroy the world. He then reminds Silver that unless he completes this task, unfortunately the world's future is going to remain the same. He then reveals Sonic's exact location and the group heads that way. After another action platforming section, but this time running through a very weirdly set up train station, we find Sonic once again, and Elise is taken by Eggman. We try to subdue Sonic once and for all, but Shadow steps in and introduces himself, and here we are with our very first Silver exclusive boss fight. This fight is again very easy because we can just throw things at Shadow before he has a chance to fight back for the most part. Fairly easy fight. Afterwards, Shadow kicks our butt anyways with a Chaos Control. Shadow explains Silver can't win because he can control time, but then they Chaos Control each other, which opens a time portal. Then Shadow tries to tell Silver that Mephiles has lied to him about the Iblis Trigger, and they both jump into the portal. They arrive on the other side of the portal, but it is 10 years in the past from before Elise's father passed away. We see an experiment is going haywire and the place is going to explode, but they stay there anyways. Elise runs up to her father, but he shields her just in time before the place blows up. Shadow and Silver run in and check the place out, but unfortunately, everyone has passed away. They then watch as Iblis and Mephiles break free and escape. Before they chase after them, the father gives them an item to seal them away with, so Silver then follows Iblis throughout the underwater base. Now, for some reason the father is just fine and is seen carrying his daughter up to the flames and places a leaf on a table, and puts the flames of the eternal sun into his daughter with a Chaos Emerald. He tells her not to cry, otherwise the flames will come out and cause problems. The father then now decides to pass away and leaves Silver with his daughter. He quickly brings her out of the base and joins with Shadow once more. They both confirm that the deed is done, and Silver places Elise on a tree before she wakes and learns of what happened too soon. Shadow places the still unnamed item next to Elise, and they both return to their own time. Once Silver gets back, he sees Blaze and tries to explain to her that the Iblis Trigger isn't Sonic after all. Blaze then tells Silver that Sonic is heading to Eggman's base due to an earlier threat, and Silver comes to the conclusion that Eggman is trying to summon Iblis from within Elise's soul. We then make our way back to the jungle to complete a similar set of 3 trials like we did as Sonic, but slightly different. For the Trial of Friendship, we have to rescue Blaze within the time limit by defeating all of the enemies. For the Trial of Memory, we have to correctly answer 3 questions pertaining to the story that we experienced so far. And for the Trial of Heart, we have to defeat all enemies without using any objects, but we can still stun and throw enemies at each other, so this is relatively easy. We then head towards Eggman's battleship and run into Sonic. We then tell him circumstances have changed and so have we. We agree to help assist him in saving the princess. We then make our way through basically the same really long level, and we see the same scene as in Sonic's story where Sonic realizes he is too late to save Elise. They then use Chaos Control and go back in time. Silver and Blaze jump into the portal with Sonic but end up in different areas. Silver and Blaze end up in the volcanic area of the game and are determined to take down Iblis once and for all. After making our way through the volcanic rock and magma, we find Iblis and aim to take him down. This fight is pretty simple. Iblis shoots shoots rock at us, and then we shoot them back at him like the opening boss fight of Silver's story. Except after he sends shockwaves, he walks up to us and slams his head down for us to float onto and use psychokinesis to damage him. He then throws a giant rock at us that we then grab and throw back at him for massive damage. After we do this a few times, we have defeated Iblis for good. Silver then tries to seal Iblis inside of himself so he can cause no more harm to the world, but it doesn't accept Silver as the vessel. Blaze then steps up and says her soul already has flames, and just like that, it accepts her as the vessel. She then instructs Silver to use Chaos Control to stop time and send Blaze to a different dimension. He refuses to lose his friend and doesn't want to do it. But then Blaze fades away anyway without Silver doing anything for some reason. I don't know, doesn't really make sense to me. And like that, we have completed another story of this game, but there is one more piece of this hedgehog-shaped puzzle to get through. Shadow's story. Here we start with a shot of Shadow running through a snowy forest towards a bunch of Eggbots, taking them out all at once and causing a huge explosion. Shadow then gets tasked with rescuing someone from Eggman's base, and we now go through the same snow level we've seen, but now as Shadow. Let's break down the things that make Shadow unique compared to Silver and Sonic. Shadow has wheels on his shoes very similar to wheelies from the 90s. Anyone remember those? Shadow also has a homing attack just as Sonic does, but if you keep hitting the same button, Shadow then does a combo attack to keep damaging the enemy. Shadow also has a dash after his jump that shoots him forward a pretty good distance. While running, Shadow also does a 360 leg sweep. After this section, the game forgets to show Shadow rescuing Rouge from the egg base, and we just skip to playing as her. She controls very similar to Knuckles in being able to fly, except it actually makes sense for her to fly because she has wings. She also shares something similar to Tails in throwing bombs as her main attack, and she can also drop them from the sky onto her enemies and even place them on the walls. In Shadow's story, we're also introduced to multiple different kinds of vehicles, but for now, we're shown the armed buggy, which has 2 rockets loaded at a time, and we have to blow up all the searchlights to open the exit point. But before we can escape, we have to defeat the egg Cerberus, and I won't go into detail on this because the fight works the exact same as in Sonic's story. Afterwards, we get a scene where Shadow and Rouge reach a terminal in search of information on Soliana and the princess. We find that Rouge has the still unnamed item from Silver's story and tells Shadow that he must escort her to the GUN rendezvous point, GUN being the name of their organization. In doing this, they head through the city to get to the forest, which brings us to the Kingdom Valley. In this level, we get introduced to another Shadow-exclusive vehicle in the Hang Glider, which also shoots rockets. The goal here is just to make it to the end of the section. After this really long level, Shadow and Rouge are walking through the ruins of Soliana Castle and explain that there was an accident 10 years prior that caused the castle to be as ruined as it is. Eggman then flies in and explains it was an ambitious project to name after their sun god. Here we learn the unnamed item is called the Scepter of Darkness, and Eggman wants it for himself. During a fight, Eggman causes Rouge to drop the Scepter of Darkness, which breaks and releases a shroud that destroys the Eggbots. Shadow then comes to life in the form of Mephiles because he has taken a liking to Shadow's body, and he is shrouded in darkness, which, fun fact, the voice actor for Mephiles here is also the voice actor for Yugi. Mephiles then sends Shadow and Rouge to a ruined city, so naturally Shadow and Rouge want to find out more about where they are, so they search the city in search of information. It then skips to them finding a random terminal in Eggman's base, then they learn that they're actually 200 years in the future, thus revealing to us that Mephiles can control time similar to Shadow's chaos control. They then hear Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles falling into the same place due to a failed attempt at saving Elise back in Sonic's story. We then see the same scene as Sonic's story where they learn about Eggman being able to control time and think of how to get back. We now move through the ruined city but as Shadow, while riding the armed buggy from before and doing some light running and rail grinding. After this, Shadow and Rouge manage to find a Chaos Emerald at some point and also find an old friend in Omega. More on him later. We then skip to everyone in the volcanic area in search of another Chaos Emerald to go back to their own time. After some action platforming as both Shadow and Rouge, we do the exact same boss fight here that we did as Sonic, so I'll be skipping over it. We then obtain the second Chaos Emerald required to send everyone back to their normal time, but before Shadow goes through the portal, he sees Mephiles and chooses to stay behind. We then see Rouge wondering why Shadow could have stayed. We also notice there's an error in the script of the game here, where the GUN agent calls it the Book of Darkness while asking Rouge if she currently has it.
Agent Rouge, report your status immediately. Have you retrieved the Book of Darkness?
She says she will explain later, but she needs to contact Omega. We then skip to her being in the jungle, which is actually just a bunch of platforming and flying. After this, we have successfully found Omega and explained to him the situation. She tells Omega to deliver the Chaos Emerald to Shadow so he can get back to the others. We then cut to Shadow confronting Mephiles in what seems like a final boss kind of fight, but not actually. We then see Mephiles has the future Shadow trapped inside a prison, but it wasn't him that trapped him. It was the people of Soliana because they were scared of what Iblis did to the world. After Mephiles tries to get Shadow to side with him, he tells Mephiles he can do it himself because he isn't interested and he determines his own destiny. After a shockingly cool build-up, Mephiles changes form and the battle begins. We start with a ton of dark creatures surrounding Shadow and we are slowly building up our chaos gauge. After we go into chaos mode, we're allowed to damage Mephiles and end the fight very quickly, but it isn't over yet. Surprisingly enough, magically, Omega is now in the future and helps Shadow fight Mephiles by shooting fireballs at him over and over again. Mephiles then retreats into a portal, but Shadow and Omega swiftly go after him but don't end up in the same place. We end up in the city, and Omega reassures Shadow that he will assist in pursuing Mephiles. GUN then calls and tells Shadow to make his way to the warehouses. Here, we meet up with Rouge again, who tells us Eggman is looking for us, but actually, it's Mephiles. Shadow then leaves on his own to track down Eggman while Omega and Rouge conduct a search of their own for the Scepter of Darkness. We go back to the train level, but we're introduced to the motorcycle, which has a sort of Gatling gun to it and shooting bullets rapidly. After we catch up to the train, we break in and ask Eggman who Mephiles is and why he wants to catch him. Eggman also tells Shadow that this is all linked to the Solaris project from 10 years ago. Eggman tells Shadow to bring Mephiles to Eggman in exchange for info on Solaris. We now see the same scene from Sonic's story which led to the Shadow boss fight, but this time we fight Silver, which is way more annoying, and it is insanely easy to get frame trapped and lose a life. After this annoying fight, we get the same couple of scenes where Shadow learns Silver can chaos control, and they go back to the incident that caused the castle to explode. We also play as Shadow in the aquatic base while playing as Silver a bit. We get the same scene of Shadow and Silver leaving Elise with the scepter and going back to their own time. When Shadow arrives, Rouge tells him that Omega is still searching for Mephiles, but Shadow tells Rouge he needs her to access Gun's database to learn where the scepter is and what it's made out of, so he can seal Mephiles. This takes them back to the beach so they can provide backup for Omega. This time, we move throughout the beach in a hang gliding section and a little bit of platforming, and we get to really get a feel for how Omega plays. He can fly for long distances as well as shoot fireballs. We then see Omega attempting to take down Mephiles, but he still lives with every shot. He then teases Omega that he was the one built to take down Shadow, and he's the one that trapped Shadow in the first place. Omega then guns down Mephiles enough that he laughs and fades away. Shadow and Rouge appear, and Omega explains that he is the one that seals him away in the future. After taking out some invading enemies coming from the desert, our team makes their way to the desert themselves to hopefully put a stop to Mephiles' plans. We start this level in another new kind of vehicle which looks like a hovercraft, but we never actually get the name of it. We have to stay in between the pillars that pop up to lead us in the right direction of where Mephiles is hiding, which leads us to the same temple we were playing in earlier as Silver. After some more platforming, we find ourselves staring down Mephiles for our final encounter. With him in possession of the Chaos Emerald, he warns Shadow one final time that he can join him to rewrite the future. But Shadow again refuses because he knows Mephiles just wants to fuel Iblis to put an end to the world. Now we begin our final fight as Shadow. The fight begins with the ground swallowed by darkness, and we must defeat the shadow monsters Mephiles conjures up to build our chaos gauge and be able to damage him. After doing this a few times, we've finally defeated Mephiles and sealed him away in the scepter from which he came. But it doesn't work. Mephiles destroyed the scepter through absorbing Shadow's power and sends Shadow and crew flying across the room. With the power of 2 Chaos Emeralds, Mephiles clones himself and seems to have unlimited power. Shadow then removes his rings and shows his true power, cutting himself and his friends a path out of the temple, and it ends on a cliffhanger. Wait, that can't be all, right? Oh, we now see we have unlocked the last episode. Let's see what this is all about and see how our 3 heroes manage to defeat Iblis and Mephiles once and for all. Okay, so this last section of the story kind of acts as a nice little bow to wrap up all the loose ends of the 3 stories before this and give the game a cool little ending. We start with a shot of Mephiles in possession of yet another Chaos Emerald, and we cut to Sonic and Elise walking together, but they get flashbanged by a dark Chaos Emerald, and Mephiles instantly kills Sonic. In doing so, Elise is pissed and sad at the same time, causing her to cry. In doing so, she has set free Iblis and is the second piece of the puzzle that is the destruction of the world. Now, Mephiles uses the Chaos Emerald to combine with Iblis and create Solaris. We then see Shadow puts his rings back on just before witnessing the creation of Solaris. But what can they do without Sonic and the Chaos Emeralds? After the flashing light, everyone gets sent to some place in between dimensions. Everyone then sees that Sonic is dead and realizes that he needed to die in order for Solaris to be created. Silver then offers to defeat Solaris by himself out of respect for Sonic. Elise then somehow feels Sonic's presence in the wind, somehow telling her he isn't dead yet. They then suddenly get the idea that he can come back to life with the Chaos Emeralds. Eggman then tells everyone Solaris has scattered the Chaos Emeralds across his distorted world, so you know what that means. We get one more section where we get to play as every character one last time before the final showdown. This part isn't anything special, just multiple short platforming sections as each character that isn't Sonic. After we get all of the emeralds and bring them to Sonic, we get to see him come back. I'll just let you guys watch this one for yourselves.
I wish to cleanse my father's sin, and I wish to talk to Sonic once again. You have given me so many things. Now it is my time to return the favor. I care not what happens to me, but please heed my voice. Sonic, come back. To me. To us.
What? Apparently this scene was and has been a big deal for gaming as a whole since this game came out, and I genuinely had no idea how I almost went 20 years without hearing or seeing it. I was truly shocked when I saw this. Now that our blue boy is back and stronger than ever, Silver and Shadow also become powered up and are ready to take on Solaris. So this brings us to the final showdown. This fight starts by introducing us to a new mechanic where we can only be in a powered up state for so long before needing to switch to a different character. Here we control Sonic, Shadow, and Silver here, with each character serving a different role. This really was just trial and error, and I had to just try each character until I figured out which one the game wanted me to do damage with, but there is more. This fight has a second phase with more trial and error over a cool final boss rendition of his world, the theme of this game. And with a final attack to Solaris' core, it is done. We have defeated Solaris and saved the world from utter destruction. We then see everyone celebrating because the world can finally go back to normal. The true Solaris then appears and we get a flashback of Elise learning about Solaris as a child before her father passed away. She was told eventually the flame would grow large enough that humanity can use Solaris to travel through time and undo past mistakes. We then see Elise and Sonic at the same spot and she explains this is where everything began and grabs the flame, but realizes if she does, her and Sonic would have never met. She then says she doesn't care what happens to the world because all she wants is to keep Sonic. Sonic then reminds her to smile and do what is right. She then puts out the flame so the world can once again be at peace. We then skip to the same ceremony from the beginning of the game, fireworks and all, and it's giving a completely different vibe. But we see Sonic yet again, but this time he's here to just enjoy the festivities. Elise then feels something familiar about the wind, and we cut to a feather floating towards Sonic as he looks to the moon. And with that, our story is over. So while I get why a lot of people may not like this game because of all the hype leading up to it, I believe it is also still having a lot going for it. This game tried to make more of a Final Fantasy approach to the story, and I can respect Sonic Team trying something different from the regular Sonic formula. I feel if this was a true action RPG, instead of having certain Sonic elements, this game would have truly flourished and been loved by a wider population of Sonic fans. But as someone who is still very new to the Sonic games myself, as I've only played Forces and Sonic 2 before this video comes out, I actually found myself really liking it in most parts. Aside from the few bumps in the road, I think overall this game is worth checking out. And there is also a fan project called P06 that is aiming to recreate Sonic 06, but without all the kinks that the original game has. So I feel this game deserves a nice solid 8 out of 10. And with that, thank you all for joining me on my Sonic 06 journey. This has been a blast to make. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching.